Hello and welcome to Cinema to the Letter. This episode, it's that egregious film known as I, Robot. On Cinema to the Letter, we break down the very nature of cinema, letter by letter. For each episode of a season topic, we cover 6 films that fit a C for classic, I for indie, N for new, E for egregious, M for masterpiece, and A for atypical. Who doesn't love an acronym, am I right? I am Thomas, and before we get started, I gotta finish tying up my Converse. I'm gonna put it right directly in the camera that none of you can see on the podcast, but right there, the product placement perfectly there for you. Converse, the shoe of 2004.
God. Oh, hello. I am Bryan, and we all know the three laws of podcasting, right? Podcasters can't hurt other humans. Or God.
I don't know. Based on certain podcasts, I think that's a lie. Some people break those rules all the time. The lesser podcasters do a very bad job of following those rules. But we're not the only ones here, Bryan, because we have a guest, our first ever returning guest for the show. You might know him from the old Double Edge Double Bill stuff that is still on our main feed if you want to peruse and listen to it. My buddy, Adam Thomas. And Adam, I want to ask you a question. Did you murder him?
No, there was no murder. I feel like I was killed a little bit creatively. And also, yeah, no, you got your Converse. We'll hop in my Audi. And I will wear my hat just over one ear for some fucking reason.
The coolest way to wear a beanie.
The best way. And walking around with a pie pan.
Oh boy. Well, Adam, we wanted to have you back on. And not only are you a guest on this particular episode, but you were very instrumental in us picking this as our E for egregious choice for our hard sci-fi season, because when we were planning out the season, Bryan and I asked you, just on a whim, because I know you're a big sci-fi fan, for like any suggestions, and especially for E for egregious, Bryan and I were stumped. We were trying very hard to think of like what fits for E for egregious in particular, and you came up with a suggestion, and we went with it, so thank you for that, for helping the show, despite having no technical investment in it necessarily.
Or emotional, or just creative, or really, I just don't want to be here.
No, we have him at gunpoint, at our futuristic gunpoint, but we're winking like a robot.
Yeah, and it's really weird. It's actually David Hyde Pierce. That's me at gunpoint. Like Niles Crane is here, just got me just held up. Yeah, and he's dressed as like Abe Sapien. It's really bizarre.
Yeah, it's like you just did the voice. You weren't like in the suit for that. That's very weird that you're doing that. But yeah, so I'm curious, Adam. You've talked about it plenty of times on like the old show, but why don't you refresh people out there? Like, are you a big sci-fi fan? Where'd that start for you? The love of sci-fi.
Yeah, I'm definitely a sci-fi fan. I think it started. I mean, probably like most people, Star Wars, Star Trek, things like that. But then as I was younger and I got into more like sort of heady sci-fi or hard sci-fi or whatever you want to call it, like Blade Runner or things of that nature, and it's just kind of always stuck with me. And then even like sci-fi action movies like the Matrix films and things like that. I pretty much, yeah, I'm bored with giving almost anything sci-fi at least a fair shot. There's some that you can just tell like, oh, this is going to be terrible, but yeah, I think like horror or even to an extent like fantasy, sort of, while movies are set in this sort of science fiction sort of realm, just the possibilities are endless. The stories can be universal. Like you can tell just a normal love story, but have it in a sci-fi sort of setting, and it really just takes it up a notch, spices it up, takes it to Flavor Town. Bam, as Emerald would say.
Right, as Emerald would say. But I'm curious then, given this is our E for Egregious episode, what makes a bad sci-fi movie for you? As someone who loves sci-fi, what do you think sort of narrows into you on like what makes, especially like a bad sort of like hard sci-fi movie?
I mean, there's several things. One is when there's absolutely no reason for it to be tailored to a sci-fi world, or when that's all they're relying on. Like, look at the robots and the technology, and the story is just shit. Which, I think we're going to probably talk about here in a minute. Or, one of the biggest tropes, even watching this, like, this is supposed to take place in 6 years in Chicago. Like, get the fuck out of here. Like, I hate that trope. I hate when they put a timestamp or a year date on it. There is absolutely no need for that. Somewhere in the future or sometime in the distant future or near future is enough. I hate the year, the date stamp on science fiction movies, and it almost always never works. It takes the realm of believability out of it because then it dates it too, because like it's 2024 now. I'm watching this movie where it's supposed to be in 2030 or 2035 or whatever the hell it was, and it's just like there's no way. It's just instantly you're like, well, this isn't gonna happen.
While I was watching this, I kept thinking like, okay, yeah, we're in 2024. This is supposed to be like a decade away, and like we are kind of nowhere near this kind of future, and often think of like Back to the Future and like Blade Runner, where I feel like a lot of people were like, it's 2019, where's like the hoverboard, where's like all this stuff that Blade Runner is supposed to be doing, and it does kind of put like, it makes you more aware of the fact that it's fiction and that it's not our reality almost.
Well, yeah, but also at the same time, I do kind of have a charm to it when like that date has long passed. Like how many movies from say like the 70s do the sci-fi things like in the year 1999? Right.
Oh no, that's
love that.
Great.
Yes.
Like RoboCop, or even like, do you remember the really shitty Double Dragon movie?
Yes.
Where they're like, LA 1996. You're like, wait a minute. What the fuck is happening?
And that was a movie released in like 94, I think. It's like,
Yeah,
they
it
put
was.
like only a couple years of space between.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there can be like a charm to that necessarily, but I do agree, yeah, when they have to like put it out there in a way where it's like, well, it'll be so long from now that surely things will be done. But it's like in 2004, it's like, guys, I don't know, in like, what, 35 years? Do you think that's going to really be that much of a difference? Right. I don't know. But yeah, let's go ahead and I guess jump into our specific movie, because we'll be talking about iRobot from 2004, the movie not adapted from the book by Isaac Asimov, but suggested by the book, which is one of the best credits I've ever
One of the most
seen.
insane credits I've ever seen. That made me lose my mind while I was like, the fact that it is at the credits at the end says that made me just even more insane. Just watching this movie, which I already didn't like, and then seeing that it was not adapted from an Isaac Asimov book, but instead suggested by, is just insane.
It kind of makes you wonder if it had a different title originally, and they were like, we got to get some kind of name recognition.
Oh,
on it
that's
too.
literally exactly what it is, and we'll get into it in just a moment here with iRobot.
We designed them to be trusted with our homes, with our way of life, with our world. But did we design them to be trusted?
The rollout of USR's new generation of robot, the NS-5, was marred by the death of designer Alfred Lanning.
Identifier. Murder's a new trick for a robot. Respond.
He don't murder him!
We're gonna miss the good old days.
What good old days?
When people were killed by other people.
I see you remain suspicious of me, Detective.
You know what they say about old dogs?
Not really.
Gotcha.
So iRobot came out July 16th, 2004, from director Alex Proyas, who we should definitely talk about because he's an interesting figure. Got his start in Australia. He burst onto the scene with The Crow in 1994, about 10 years prior to this, and he's only made about 6 movies because he followed that up with Dark City, and then Garage Days, which is a movie that does not exist at all, and weirdly isn't like fantastical to any degree. It's literally about like a garage band, literally. And then iRobot, and then the Nicolas Cage film Knowing, and then Gods of Egypt, And that's the end of his career, completely. But yeah, Adam, I know you're a fan, especially of Dark City, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love Dark City. I love The Crow. And then, yeah, that's about it as far as Alex Proyas. But yeah, Dark City's great. Dark City is another one. I think it's got sort of the recognition now, but definitely at the time, people didn't really give two shits about it. But this really cool, weird, strange sci-fi movie. So, I mean, it's definitely in his wheelhouse to make a good sci-fi movie. Just, yeah. I don't know. I don't know, because they don't cast Gerard Butler as Seth. And you're like, well, wait a minute.
Well, I just feel like a big thing with Proyas, based on like The Crow and Dark City, is like he's a guy who like really flourished in that like mid to late '90s period, and both those movies, well, I think they're both great, are definitely of that specific era and could not have been made at any point, like before or after, really.
Yeah, he really flourished in sort of that gothic industrial sort of style that was really big at the time, probably because of The Crow. I mean, to be honest, The Crow sort of started that, where it was like, oh, we got to copy this sort of look. And he really, really did well with it. It's just, I feel like when he started to have to, not necessarily had to do, but when he started trying to do a little bit more polished work, that it just did not fit his sensibilities.
Yeah, particularly when you find out that like he kind of got his start doing like MTV like music videos and stuff like that. He feels very much like those kind of directors, for sure. But I know, Brian, you've at least seen The Crow, right?
I watched The Crow in high school because, of course, I did, and I was a huge Nine Inch Nails fan, a huge The Cure fan, as I am now, actually. But yeah, when I watched it, I liked it, and I thought it was like great for just kind of those like grimy, just really just depressing vibes that I really liked. And then I didn't see Dark City until very recently, I think, like a year ago, because I think it was on Criterion. And I was like, oh, this sounds absolutely insane. And it's got, you know, Rufus Sewell and William Hurt and Kiefer Sutherland and Jennifer Connelly. And yeah, that movie fucking rules. I think that it's such a fucking banger. And it's so weird and so, you know, much like The Crow, feels very 90s because of like that gothic, like you said, Adam, like that industrial feel. But they also both have this like huge world building almost, right? Like they both take place in these like fabricated worlds that are so grimy and dark and like depressing and feel very 90s. And it is very interesting to see that he kind of gravitated to like this very shiny and sheen and slick kind of sci-fi movie. And then I haven't seen Knowing, kind of curious by it because it's Nicolas Cage, but I did see Gods of Egypt in theaters and I did not like it, but I'm always curious to revisit it because that movie is insane and looks just so crazy and is just very, very weird. And yeah, just seeing how he got his start in like MTV music videos and stuff is very interesting. And I don't know, we'll talk a little bit more about him, I'm sure, but very fascinating and very weird director, I think.
Well, yeah, and especially when you also consider like a big thing with I think the Crow and Dark City is that those are both movies that have very early versions of CG, particularly Dark City.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They still at the same time have like a practicality to them, especially I love the model work in Dark City.
Oh yeah.
The actual literal like buildings of the city just like bursting out of the ground and shit like that looks so awesome. And I think the trouble with that guy is like he's one of many examples of like an international director coming over to Hollywood, in this case to make iRobot, at a particular point that we've talked about this, like our first E for Egregious pick ever, Brian, was another 2004 blockbuster, Van Helsing. This feels very similar in terms of it's during that era where blockbusters were like, well, now we have computers and there's nothing they can't do. There's nothing they cannot do whatsoever. And I think he definitely tries to take advantage of that to not great results, as we'll just talk about here. So iRobot is, as we mentioned, not based on but suggested by the Isaac Asimov story book of the same name, which is like apparently a series of short stories. Have you read it, Adam? The book iRobot?
I want to say yes. I own it, and it's a really old copy, so I'm pretty sure I did. I've at least thumbed through it. I bought it back when I was buying like kind of anything I could get my hands on, you know, Asimov, Lovecraft, Palahniuk, you know, whatever. But I'd be hard pressed to tell you anything about it. I know it's not this movie. I can tell you that much.
No, no, yeah. From what I understand, it's like a series of short stories, really. It's not like a
Yeah.
full-fledged narrative, yeah, as much. But basically, the whole journey of this movie is very odd, where one of the credited screenwriters, Jeff Vinter, apparently had written a script in the 90s called Hardwired, which was supposed to be like more of a contained kind of Agatha Christie-style murder mystery about finding out which of these various robots killed the main scientist character, who in this movie is played by James Cromwell. So there's like there was a much more kind of like grounded story that didn't have as much like big action flair to it. And then Fox bought the script, and I think got turned over to Disney as well, where it went through a lot of turnaround, a lot of like, no, we gotta make this a big blockbuster, we gotta add action sequences and stuff, to the degree that like when it got bought back by Fox, they were like, oh, we recently got the rights to the Isaac Asimov stories, so we're gonna slap the name iRobot on this. And then Vinter did like another rewrite job where it's like, hey, go ahead and like add the laws of robotics, like a couple references. Like apparently, the character played by Bridget Moynihan was renamed Dr. Susan Calvin, who was a character in the book. The suggested by credit literally just means they added a couple elements in here, sprinkled some stuff. You know, they like salt bait it, just put some salt on there, and then brushed it around on this already existing script that was already mangled, including by Akiva Goldsman, who's like an infamous like kind of studio guy screenwriter who had I believe had already won his Oscar for A Beautiful Mind, which is still fucking wild. They won a script for that fucking piece of shit movie. And then he also was like famous for like writing like the Joel Schumacher Batman movies, and he has like so many different writing credits on like the newer like Star Treks and Transformer projects with Paramount, stuff like that. He's definitely like a studio hire guy who they often go to like, hey, fix this up or whatever. And apparently he was very responsible for a lot of the stuff once Will Smith came on board. A lot of Will Smith's dialogue was written by Akiva Goldsman, which makes a lot of sense based on this movie to me.
Yeah, it really does. I'm sure we'll kind of get into this, but like this, it really does feel like a movie that is, trying to do something completely different from, Isaac Asimov and that kind of very cerebral and kind of like really deep and philosophical kind of science fiction, and it's trying to put it into this Hollywood like popcorn blockbuster. It's a weird combination, and it doesn't work at all.
It absolutely does not work at all. And the thing is, it's what also another thing that sort of can make or break these type of movies. Well, really any movie, but just the over reliance on computer effects and things like that instantly date the film as well. I mean, I remember when this came out watching it, there's certain scenes where you're like, what the fuck? Why would you just go with that? It just doesn't work. The thing is, and also, yeah, about Will Smith, his dialogue, he feels like he's a character from a different movie, completely just in this universe. I mean, maybe that's the point. I don't know. But if it is, it sucks. You don't care, right, really, about anybody in the movie. The stakes never feel that high. I think a big misstep is, they tell you 100 times that, everybody's reliant on robots and robots are this and that. You see what, 2 scenes, the one robot bringing the lady in her inhaler, and then robots loading trash into a garbage truck, and that's kind of it. You don't see them really doing anything that you would consider like bettering people or helping people or anything. They don't show them assisting in surgeries. They don't show them like even babysitting or anything. Like any of that would have made the stakes that much crazier when you're like, oh, if these things go nuts, they've infiltrated every part of everybody's lives. They don't give you any of that. It's just a couple of them, you see them, and then that's it. The rest of them are just stacked up in a factory or have Spider-Man physics.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Which, like, is weird for Proyas because The Crow and Dark City both have this, like, really great sense of location, right? And, like, obviously not, like, real location of, like, those movies take place in, like, Hell City, USA, basically, and, like... But you get a real sense of like where these stories are taking place, and you just don't get that with this movie at all. And it's interesting for Proyas though because he like came from like music videos, like we said, like the MTV era, and I think when you watch something like The Crow, you can really tell, not just because that movie is like has a bunch of like Nine Inch Nails and The Cure music and stuff like that, but just the way that he shoots stuff and edits stuff, it has this music video quality where every shot, every kind of like camera movement, everything has to be so precise and has to like tell the story just visually. And I think a lot of that is lost in this movie as well. There's flourishes as well, which, again, we'll get into, but it just, it doesn't feel like his other movies in a weird way, which makes sense, with how much it's been kind of cobbled together from these disparate elements and stuff like that. But yeah,
the production design of it truly feels like such a night and day thing from, like Dark City and The Crow, where, like you mentioned, they take place in these like weird fantastical versions of like various different cities. And the city in this movie looks, quite frankly, like fucking Universal City Walk.
Yeah.
Like, there's that one opening bit of him walking down the street, and it looks so like a theme park version of what a future city would be. And not even nearly as stylish as that.
No, you're right. Like, The Crow takes place in a fictionalized version of Detroit. I live right on the outskirts of Detroit, have lived in Detroit. I've been around Metro Detroit my whole life. It's not Detroit, but it's believable in that universe. Like, yeah, this is a fictionalized version of Detroit. Absolutely. Dark City, you get the idea that they took old photographs or films and constructed a version of like 1930s New York or whatever. And it makes sense because it was constructed by these alien beings. There is nothing about this that says, oh, this is Chicago in 2035.
Right.
Where? When? Like, they didn't even bother to like maybe show the like the Sears Tower or something like that. That's famous in Chicago. Like, even though that would have been grounded it a little bit.
They have a couple establishing shots where they try to have some of like the weird kind of like factories and stuff like that, but it's like so completely disparate from, like I said, like whenever Will Smith's walking down like that fucking one street, and it's just like, oh look, we got like hot dog vendors and robots and whatever.
Where he's eating his pie.
Yeah.
Street pie.
Everyone's favorite line, hold my pie.
That is pretty funny, actually.
Yeah, hold it or wear it.
Yeah, it's really upsetting too, because I got a little excited when I saw that it was in Chicago, which is like a city I'm just really kind of fascinated by, and I love when movies take place there. And you get no sense of where this takes place or what the city looks like, or just kind of how this has been affected by all this technology, really. This entire movie really has the feeling of discount Minority Report, which is so apparent. And like Minority Report has incredible world building and just has like, it looks incredible and is just like so fascinating and actually has engaging themes and all that stuff. And this movie is borrowing a lot from Minority Report, but it feels like the like bargain bin version of that in some cases, with the exception, of course, of like Will Smith, who is like, massive movie star at this point.
Yeah, it's Temu Minority Report.
Right.
For sure. Not for nothing, but you're watching Will Smith, and I'm glad he's kind of on the upswing. Still, the guy's clearly got problems in life and everything. And I'm like, all right, it's Will Smith. Oh, who's his little friend? Oh, no.
Right.
I mean, his little friend who shows up very briefly at the opening, and then all the way at the climax, where we've completely forgotten that Shia LaBeouf is in this fucking movie.
It's like Constantine. It's basically the same role he played in Constantine.
But at least in Constantine, I remember him being in more than 2 scenes, I think. I think he was in it a bit more than this.
The beginning, mid, and end, yeah.
Right.
And the way Will Smith's character talks about him, where he's like, oh, this fucking kid I'm always having to deal with. And like, you saw him once, and like you never see him throughout this entire movie. Right. And yeah, I don't know, it does feel like I'm imagining he was on like Even Stevens at this point, and he was just like, let's just get him in this movie just to more star power, I guess. But
the kids like the LaBeef. They want the LaBeef. Let's get the LaBeef in here.
Holes.
We have the LaBeef. But it's like, and then they have this pre-existing like back and forth, like, don't swear, go home. When is it? Why?
Oh god.
That's the thing. They want to build up the idea of like, oh, Will Smith is like this good cop that like the entire neighborhood, I guess, knows, even though they contradict that, where it's like he's buddy with Shia, but then he's shown like chasing down a robot who, like you mentioned earlier, the inhaler thing. By the way, the lady with the inhaler, I found out, I thought she looked familiar. She's also in, speaking of Will Smith, the previous year to this, she is the lady who has the little kid in Bad Boys 2 at like the video store. When Martin Lawrence and Will Smith would do their whole thing back and forth. Yes, that's the same lady. That whole thing, I think, contradicts that kind of like nice guy image where it's like always willing to chase down like a robot who, in this history, as Shia McBride explains, as chief of police, Like, no robot has been guilty of any crime ever, but he's like, he's stealing a purse because I have this prejudice against robots, because that's how we establish this. Is like he's willing to do something that like has no precedent whatsoever in our society, evidently, in this world.
And also, what the fuck is a robot gonna do with a purse? Like what is it stealing it for? Like, no contents of that purse could be useful to one of these robots at all. So you see that, you're like, that's the crime.
I don't know. Maybe that robot needs some new makeup, need to have a different look, and that lady just had the perfect purse in theory.
I mean, the robot's lips are chapped. It needs some Burt's Bees or whatever.
I'm trying to beat my face like a Mona Lisa. All right, take it easy, brother.
It is such a heavy-handed way of like showing that like who this character is, right? That he is like a good cop who like, you know, is friends with Shia LaBeouf and friends with, you know, the like old lady that he goes to visit. But like, yeah, that is like just deeply prejudiced to like robots, and it's like, what's the just dumbest way to show that? And like, there's so many things in this movie that are like just plain dumb. I know that's not very like, you know, smart or academic or whatever, but like just so dumb. And that's one of the things that like starts this movie off is him chasing that robot, which is just like so ridiculous and stupid.
Well, I mean, this is after, of course, his character introduction where he has this whole like nightmare thing, and then he wakes up, does his morning workout, and then puts on his Converse, as I referenced earlier, like with the camera just fully close up on this fucking Converse that he's like lacing up like it looks like a fucking commercial. This movie also just like it visually, it looks less like Alex Proyas, like interesting like music video aesthetic, and much more like a commercial, which there's so much product placement. There's the Audi thing. Right after the Converse thing, there's the FedEx bot and shit like that.
Oh, yep. The JVC CD player that I used to own when I was like 20.
Yep.
Playing Superstitious. And I'm watching this with my kid, you know, today. She's watching parts with me. And it's in that scene, and it's him in the shower, obviously, so you can get the ass shot. But even my kid, she goes, okay, but why doesn't he have the curtain closed?
Oh,
I'm
my
like,
God.
I have no idea.
Thank
It
you.
makes no sense.
Thank you.
It makes sense. People who shower their apartment alone without closing the curtain are friggin' maniacs.
I don't even think he has a curtain at all. Like I don't even like.
I don't think he does either. He's like at the old style tub with no shower curtain.
His carpet's gonna get wet, all like on the ground.
He's destroying his bathroom.
And it
the
is like
floor's got to be just damaged at this point.
And I mean, look, we're happy to get the Will Smith, the shot of him like naked like that. That like fan he has that has like one blade that just spins around. And I'm like, how?
Yeah, that's not cooling off anybody. That's not doing nothing.
Yeah, it's one of those like sci-fi
That's
things
barely
where
moving the air around the room.
right. It looks kind of cool, but you think about it for more than 2 seconds, and you're like, this is completely impractical.
And also, did he have like an unedited, unreleased like super track of Superstitious? Because he's doing a lot of things in that apartment with that one song playing. Either that, or he's got it on repeat over and over. Which again, maniac.
It's every single studio version Stevie ever recorded. It's just on a loop on that one
back
scene.
back to back. Yep.
Here's the B-side that was on this album. Here's the live version. Just every single version of that one song.
He's got the part from that one like Fantasia or wherever the hell movie it was in.
Oh, right.
Blasting on the TV.
But let's talk, while we're bringing up the introduction to Will Smith, let's talk about Will Smith a bit, because that's incredibly key to this movie, obviously. This comes at a specific time for Will Smith's career where, obviously he hits it big with, The Fresh Prince and his, both rap and his TV career at that time, and then goes into, some of his smaller appearances until, Bad Boys, Independence Day, Men in Black make him a star.
Yeah.
But then around Wild Wild West and Legend of Bagger Vance, he's not doing great. He starts kind of trying to get into the Oscar stuff with Ali, and then from Men in Black 2 all the way until I believe I Am Legend, he makes hit after hit after hit. All of his movies up to around 7 pounds make $100 million, and he's in his full on Millennium, I am the biggest star 4th of July possible kind of career, and this is right smack dab in the middle of it, because before this is Bad Boys 2, and after this is Hitch, in terms of the lead vehicle. I'm not gonna count Shark Tale necessarily, even though that's part of it, because that fish fucking looks like Will Smith. In terms of the big Will Smith kind of big vehicles, this is right in the middle of all that. And I'm curious, Bryan, what is your relationship with Will Smith exactly? What was your introduction to Smith, and what is your perception of him?
It is interesting, and like I'm really showing how young I am here. But like that era that you just described, where he is just making like hit after hit, and is like probably the biggest movie star at the time, I would say, especially definitely for me, because I was growing up around this time, and I was a kid, and I definitely watched Shark Tale a bunch as a kid. And it was this kind of, like, to me, when I was a kid, Will Smith was the biggest movie star in the entire world. Like, there was no one, I think, more, like, huge and charismatic and just, like, so fascinating to watch. I didn't even really like watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. One of my cousins did, and I kind of was, like, forced to watch it. But, like, he is just so compelling. And a lot of those, like, kind of classic movies, like Bad Boys or Independence Day and Men in Black, you go back to them now and you realize just it makes so much sense how he was the biggest star in the world, because he is so incredible in those movies, and he has such a great personality for a movie. You know, he's so watchable and he's so charismatic, and he just like carries movies like Men in Black, which like I had caught on TV like over the years, like, you know, 10, 20 minutes or whatever, but I'd never watched the full thing until like a year ago, and he's like so incredibly good in that movie. But yeah, it's really fascinating, I think, to go back to a lot of these movies, even ones that like aren't even as well discussed, like Enemy of the State, which I absolutely love, and he's really incredible in. Yeah, he was just like everywhere, and he was just the biggest movie star to me as a kid, even if I didn't like love a lot of his movies or watch a lot of his movies. And I know, like, Thomas, you and I talk a lot about kind of the current state of movie stars and kind of what we're missing and stuff like that. And I think we are missing someone like Will Smith, who is just massive and is everywhere, and everyone knows him, and he is the coolest person, and everyone goes to see his movies and stuff like that. And yeah, I still love him. I still think he's great. But you guys, I mean, you guys have probably a longer history with Will Smith than I do.
I mean, Adam, yeah, I'm curious about, like, because you were more conscious of, like, the whole rise of Smith. Like, what's your perception of him, especially, like, around this era?
I mean, yeah, I definitely was. You know, I watched Fresh Prince of Bel-Air as it came on. I remember, like, his first big movie that came out was, like, 6 Degrees of Separation or whatever it was, with Donald
Right.
Sutherland and this whole other cast. I was a huge Will Smith fan. Not necessarily the music. He had a couple bangers here and there, but I really did like Will Smith a lot. And it seemed like these type of movies, these iRobot, Bad Boys, Men in Black, absolutely seemed like a natural progression for him. I thought, just because of his charisma. I mean, there was no doubt he was going to be a big star. And he was absolutely, at this time, the biggest star in the world. I'd say you could put him, probably Tom Cruise was still in there, and some of those guys, but he absolutely was the biggest star in the world. He's earning $20 to $30 million a movie. He's also getting back end, like, and I think he deserved it. I mean, he could absolutely sell a movie just on his name. Obviously, I think ego and everything got into some of his decisions later. Some of his more dramatic stuff, like 7 Pounds. I know people who, oh my God, it's garbage. It's a garbage film. Terrible fucking movie.
I'm not even a huge fan of Pursuit of Happiness either, which I think is, like, much more, like, cloying.
I absolutely not either. I feel like his Oscar baiting movies are what I've talked about ad nauseum before on our old show and other shows, is just emotional baity movies. Like, there's no real weight to them. They just know they're going for the quick cuts to bring out tears in people, and some people automatically think that makes a good movie. Oh, that was so powerful. Like, fuck off. Like, what? He gave his eyes to Woody Harrelson. Get the fuck out of here. Like, this is so stupid.
Well, and then he committed suicide by jellyfish, and everyone really was emotionally affected.
Because it's super painful. A jellyfish? Fucking come on, man. Like, dive into a wood chipper.
Right. I'm totally 100%. I would honestly say, like, the only one of his sort of, like, Oscar baity movies that still works on its own is, like, not what you're talking about, is Ali. And that's only because Michael Mann made a very interesting version of a traditional biopic.
Yeah,
and worked off of his charisma, which is, I think, like, the big thing is, like, that's a whole movie where it's like, yes, we cast him as, like, one of the most charismatic people in human history. That makes sense.
Right.
That totally works out. As opposed to, yeah, it's a rough thing, because my whole thing with Will Smith is I remember very distinctly seeing the first Men in Black as a young kid, and one, just loving that movie entirely. One of my favorite movies ever. But especially him in it, I was instantly just like, this is not just like the biggest movie star I've ever seen, but just this is the coolest person I've ever seen anywhere. Like a dude who I'm just like, I could never achieve the coolness of this. Keep in mind, I'm like a young kid. And if you go back to some of these things, not necessarily Men in Black, but some of like, say, like Miami and stuff like that, a banger of a song, but that music video is like insanely corny and cheesy. Even like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air is a very corny sitcom, but he just like, it's his confidence that oozes all of that.
Yeah, all of his music videos are corny and dumb. Like, he doesn't have one good one. No way.
But meanwhile, I'm like a young kid, like, this is the coolest man possible. He's going to Miami.
He is getting fucking jiggy with it. Look at that tropical flower suit. He's so jiggy. Ah.
And I think, like, the frustrating thing with this movie in particular, because you look at, like, what is sandwiched in between here with, like, a Bad Boys 2 and, like, a Hitch. Like, both of those at least know, like, okay, we have to have Will, like, all that charisma and star power needs to bounce off somebody, whether it's Martin Lawrence or even in Hitch with, like, Eva Mendes. I think the reason those two, I would argue, are the better of this kind of era for Smith, because I'm not a huge fan of a lot of these movies of this era, quite frankly, is, like, he has somebody to bounce off of. Even in, like, I Am Legend, he has that dog. For most of the movie, at least.
Isn't Kevin James in Hitch, too?
Kevin James is the third lead of Hitch, yeah.
I've never seen that movie. That is one of where I'm like, I'm fucking good. Like, just seeing the trailer, I'm like, I'm good. I can't stand Kevin James, and I get it. He falls in love, and then silly things start happening to the ultimate bachelor. Seen that fucking movie 8 million times.
I don't disagree with that, but at the same time, I think just the star chemistry off of him and Eva Mendes, I think, works a lot to get you past, like, say, Kevin James. I mean, he's still there, and he does his Kevin James shtick, but, you know, Will Smith is at least, like, looking down, and I'm like, you're a fucking moron, and I hate being around you. Like, yeah, Will, I agree with you. Fuck that guy.
Get Paul Blart the fuck out of here.
Right, yes. But the thing is, like, with iRobot, he doesn't really have that, because Bridget Moynihan isn't that.
She's drywall.
Right, drywall.
Yeah, she's drywall, bro. 100%. Yeah. Shy McBride's fun. If they had more with him and Shy McBride, that would work. I really like Shy McBride as a character actor.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially, like, I really like that bit later on where Shy McBride does the whole thing. They're like, man, you know what? It reminds me of the Wolf Man. Man creates monster, monster kills him. Wolfman, that's Frankenstein. Like, whatever. They're all the same. It's one of the few, like, funny bits of this movie, quite frankly. But in this movie, yeah, there's just, like, not anybody. And it's a shame because, like, honestly, I think weirdly this movie kind of brightens up to me the most when he's sharing scenes with the robot character, Sonny, played by Alan Tudyk, who I think is, like, such a wasted opportunity for this whole movie. Because, like, the whole movie hinges around that character. Because, like, Will Smith is, like, obviously very robot prejudice, but then gets a secret message about, like, James Cromwell summoning him to somewhere, where it turns out James Cromwell has just, like, flung himself, it's seemingly, off of, like, a very high point and, like, crashed in the middle of the lobby of his, like, big robotics institute. And he starts to investigate, like, okay, who is it? Like, one of these robots killed him, obviously. It's gotta be one of these robots. And Sonny is this main robot who's, like, the most recent creation of James Cromwell before he passed away. And so he's really adamant about, like, this robot killed him, something happened here. And I think, like, the interrogation scene and some of the scenes later on just made me realize, like, why wasn't Sonny just, like, his buddy the whole time? If you're gonna go dumb, go with, like, a dumb buddy cop movie where it's Will Smith and Alan Tudyk robot.
Right.
That's a way better fucking movie than this one.
Do Alien Nation, but have it be robots instead.
Yeah, exactly.
I completely agree. I mean, there's cool ideas, right? Like the scene where they're in the factory and they're all lined up and he's trying to figure out where he is in there.
Yeah.
Cool kind of scene,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where he shoots the one and he still keeps talking. But when you really, like, it's a great idea, but then you have just the incredibly dated CGI already. You have him trying to act off of Bridget Moynihan, which, again, I've seen her in other things where she's decent. There's zero chemistry between the two of them in this. So it becomes sort of like boring. I feel like this movie is just a series of scenes that I'm waiting to get through to get to the next scene.
Yes.
Like I can't really think of anything that really gripped me, you know. And there should be like it should have been super exciting, the tunnel scene with the truck full of the robots and them attacking him and everything. It just looks bad. It looks silly. They're doing too many one-liners. Like Will Smith, I understand that's sort of his action hero thing. He does, you know, like Welcome to Earth and all that shit, which is fine. It works when it's spaced out. That's the other thing. He does a lot of that in this, and it's just dumb. Like I know Bryan said earlier, for lack of a better term, I agree. It's dumb. The dialogue is dumb. The whole structure is dumb.
I would argue at least like some of that sillier stuff I think is where it gets a bit more fun to me, like in the second half of the movie. The first half is so much of what you're talking about, like back to back. Particularly there's just a certain point where like he does like a bad one-liner at Bridget Moynihan. She just says like, "Are you trying to be funny?"
That's actually that one was funny to me.
Right. It's like, yeah, because I agree with her. Like, yeah, are you trying to be funny? These are really lame jokes, Will. These are bad.
The one that actually got me was when he shows up to Bridget Moynihan's house and he's got like the cut on his head, and she's like, "A cat did this to you?" And he just looks at her like, "How would a cat do this to me?" Which I think is very funny and is a really good use of Will Smith in this movie.
I agree. I agree with that. Yeah.
But like, it's really weird for me because like, Will Smith clearly is the reason that this movie got made as big as it did and made as much money as it did and everything like that. But I do think he is kind of really miscast in this movie because even with the kind of context we had earlier of like, this was basically cobbled together by like, hey, we have this script already, let's just shove some Asimov lore into this. But the Asimov stuff and the kind of like moral questioning of the story is completely at odds with Will Smith doing like one-liners. Again, a few of them work, but like it doesn't match, you know? Like you need someone like a Harrison Ford in Blade Runner or like Tom Cruise in Minority Report, like, you know, these characters who are kind of uncovering this kind of deep web or whatever, and there is none of that in this movie. And as much as I like Will Smith and I think he is doing, I think, as best he can with this movie, it just, I don't know, it's very weird casting. And I agree with you, like earlier, like that scene with like the robots all lined up is a great idea and is where I kind of started to like, okay, like things are gonna like kick off now. And the CGI looks horrible. I think it looks really, really bad. And even later, yeah, like those like highway scenes, which are the most, I think, Minority Report that it gets, like those just feel really, really out of Minority Report. Just, yeah, look absolutely hideous, especially with all like the robots when they're doing all of their like whole flips and jumping and everything. They're just, I don't know, it feels weightless in a way. None of the movie has that kind of the groundedness and the tactility that you would want if you were going to adapt like an Asimov story. And it's just very frustrating.
But particularly like the big thing with the effects, like during that sequence we're all talking about, where it's like all these different robots are lined up, the one specific shot where Will Smith is in the middle of them and he's got his gun, and he truly looks like a cardboard cutout, just like being shuffled along.
And you know, I think part of it might be too, and I do agree with the Will Smith miscasting, and maybe it was the studio, maybe it was a little bit Will Smith, I don't know, but I feel like they were too worried to make him super cool and handsome and sexy, and more worried about sort of the facade of the character than the character having any real development itself. Because he looks completely out of place wearing the clothes he's wearing. They get the nude scene in the shower, and it doesn't work because there is no chemistry. But you feel like he's hitting on Bridget Moynihan a lot, or she's into him in some way, and none of it works. He does at no point do I feel like this is a hard-nosed sort of detective that does have these prejudices, that's been through a terrible event and tragedy. I don't get that at all.
Well, especially when, like, I think a big thing with, like, Will Smith, like, say, in Men in Black, like, one of my favorite scenes in Men in Black is the whole training thing where he, like, they have all the agents shooting the, like, cardboard cutouts that pop up, and he shoots the one little girl. Right, and Rip Torn is just like, what do you do? Like, well, you know, you figure, why is a little girl out here in the middle of the night with a chemistry book that feels too advanced for her? Like, that's such a great example of, like, the sort of street smart thing that works so well about Will Smith.
Yeah, and in that movie in particular, like, he's socially awkward. but he's just really good at his job, and he's really funny and tough. And he thinks he's the funniest guy or the coolest guy there, and nobody else buys into his bullshit. It just works for that movie.
But he also has like at least a more distinctive way of thinking that has him like really work as like a fully developed character while still taking advantage of like Will Smith's specific persona. Versus in this movie, they don't really give that to him because like the guy who would be sort of like the street smart Will Smith type wouldn't say run down a robot who's got like a purse and shit like that.
Right.
It feels like this guy just doesn't has no perception of like his environment to any degree. So when he does like dumb bullshit and he's like, "Oh no, I'm the smart one here because I don't trust robots because fuck them because they're too logical." It makes him weirdly like an anti-intellectual in such a weird way as opposed to like embracing like his own specific brand of smarts. It's just like, no, fuck technology. It's terrible.
Yeah, his prejudice against it too. When you find out why, it's dumb. Like it makes no sense. Like I get it, but it's really dumb. Well, I was going to live. The girl was going to die. So, but he still should have saved her first.
They establish a thing later on that like Will Smith, he tried to save a young girl who was drowning in a car, and apparently they were both drowning in two separate cars that were falling down. And this robot comes in and saves Will Smith because, to quote him, "I was 45% more likely to survive," versus she was 11% more likely to survive. Therefore, he saved me instead of saving the little girl. So now I hate robots forever for it.
And then for hating technology and everything so much, he's sure, he's got a robot arm and artificial lungs and robot ribs and everything else. And like, what are we talking about here?
The thing about Will Smith that I really like, and you mentioned like that scene in Men in Black, is when he knows what he's doing, right? Like I like seeing Will Smith just be like focused, and he knows how to do his job. And this is kind of that movie, again, despite him chasing a robot that didn't steal a purse or what stupid scene. But like most of this movie is Will Smith going like, "The robots, they're gonna kill us all. I'll tell you," and everyone just thinks he's crazy. And it I don't know. It's part of that thing I'm talking about of like Will Smith feeling miscast in this movie where I don't know, that it just doesn't work for me necessarily. And like I mentioned like Enemy of the State earlier, which that's a movie where he is kind of like on the run and kind of, more on like the defensive side, defending himself. And that works like way better for me. And I don't know, it is, I think, also the themes of this movie, which to even call them themes, like it is the most generic and boring and just has nothing new to say about like the AI problem or like robots and that kind of question, which I often find really boring in movies anyways. But this is kind of one of those, I think that's an example of that, because it has nothing new to say about like the moral kind of questions that we have about AI and robots and kind of consciousness and stuff like that. Like the only thing it has to say is just, well, what if robots revolt one day? What are you going to do about that, huh? And that's it. It has nothing else to say. It doesn't struggle with the idea of like a robot gaining consciousness. It doesn't deal with the kind of irony, like you said, Adam, of like him having a robot arm. It just kind of, they mention it as just like isn't this like kind of weird and ironic that he has that? But it doesn't like grapple with it. It doesn't really engage with any of those themes in this movie.
Especially when like that shit is revealed like an hour into the movie.
Right, exactly.
Which is wild. It's just probably they want to make that a twist because like earlier on you see like he has these markings and stuff and you get the hints about like the whole accident that happened like at the very beginning of the movie. But it's just like all that's indicated from him like with that sort of cyborg energy is that he's just like, "Oh yeah, let me scratch my arm a bit in the morning." Like there's a weird point where I have like an itch and then it's gone. Like if you actually dealt with that from like the beginning, that would be a lot more interesting. But he's like he hates part of himself basically because he's part of a robot.
There's scenes where he's like he has like a spray that he does, I guess, to like fix his arm when it gets like busted up. He like is hiding it from Bridget Moynihan, right? So you're thinking like, oh, is this, he's gonna like reveal this to her whenever they get closer, and it's gonna be like this big moment. Maybe maybe like we'll have some romance, even though these characters have no chemistry. And no, we just get like a weird awkward scene where she kind of like touches his arm and his chest for like a minute for some reason.
Gives him a little tickle.
Right. Yeah, tickles his ribs a little bit.
That'd be great if he's just like, oh, stop it. No, stop it. It's too ticklish. Stop it.
And it's like, and she starts chasing him around the apartment.
Like I kind of mentioned earlier, the closest the movie gets to like some of these things we're talking about is with the Sonny character, who I do actually think is like one of the bigger bright spots of the movie, really. There's the point earlier on where they do like the interrogation scene between him and Will Smith. I think is probably the best scene of the movie, quite frankly, where they go back and forth just like, oh, what, can a robot compose a symphony? Can it turn canvas into like a beautiful structure? And he's like, well, can you do that? And he just like shuts him up for a second. Just like, this is like a rare moment of like, oh, Will Smith has like been embarrassed. He's been shot down by this fucking robot. That's kind of cool. Do you guys like the Sonny character to any degree?
On paper, I think I like his character, right? Because it is the closest the movie comes to engaging with any of those, themes that Asimov is interested in. But I don't like the design for the robots themselves. CGI apart, I just like, I don't know. They look really creepy and like not inviting, which I think is like what this company's supposed to be, like making robots for people, right? I don't know. They look very creepy to me, and I don't know. It falls into the same, I think, pitfalls that like, he becomes a bit kind of too winky. I mean, literally, he winks at him at the end,
Right.
but
Yes.
yeah, he just becomes a bit too kind of not comedic relief necessarily, but he almost gets there for me, and I don't know. Although I love Alan Tudyk, and I think he's pretty good as the voice of him.
Yeah, I like Alan Tudyk in it. I think, he's great as the voice and everything. I, too, also do not like the design, particularly the facial design.
Yeah.
But I do like the interrogation scene and all that. It's pretty cool. But once he turns into just generic action robot, it just, and just with this plot armor and all, it's like, okay. The one scene that in particular, as far as the Sonny action scenes, when he's getting through the hallway and the other two robots attack him, and he like jumps in the air and does like a drill claw maneuver where he just goes through the air. Like, okay, I understand they're robots, but gravity and physics still have to apply. Like, what are we doing? Like, doesn't have jets on his feet or anything. Like, what the fuck? So, yeah, I think in theory, I like the idea of the character. I do like Alan Tudyk's performance, but it just becomes just so overtly silly at the point. I mean, even their handshake at the end, and like, okay.
That ending scene is bonkers. I want to talk about that in a bit more detail in a little bit.
Right, what are the implications?
It's it's fucking wild how this movie ends. But I think my thing is, like, I agree with you that stuff is very silly, like, toward the end, like, even, like, the freeway chase scene, all that other stuff. There's no gravity, there's no necessarily weight to it. But at the same time, I prefer Proyas in that mode compared to some of the earlier bits. Like, we talked about the chase scene with, like, the one robot. But I think my least favorite action sequence in this whole movie is the bit where he goes over to James Cromwell's mansion. And this is one of the dumbest scenes in this fucking movie. That's very dumb. He sneaks into this mansion of this dead man who recently died. Not at all suspicious. And he
24 hours ago, at best.
Within the last 24 hours, this guy has been murdered.
Yeah, I mean, at best.
And he, like, sneaks in and is, like, looking through his old files and tries to find out some information about, like, oh, wait, the Lake Michigan thing and all this other stuff. And then probably the most contrived way I've ever seen anybody set up save the cat, literally. Because James Cromwell has a cat that's in this mansion, and Will Smith has a weird back and forth to nobody except the cat about, like, oh no, look, you just had a loss, I get it, but this relationship's not going to work. It's like, who are you doing this bit for? Is it the cat?
Us, man. Us. For the audience, bro.
Right, clearly.
Well,
the audience
I mean,
is there. But then, like, this big, like, yellow structure that's outside turns into a robot and, like, starts smashing stuff, and Will immediately saves the cat in that. It's like, this is the longest walk to get to that fucking point. Especially at, like, 45 minutes into the movie. Like, why do we need this?
And I love that this guy who just died 24 hours ago under very suspicious circumstances was also one of the founding members. He wrote the laws of robotics. It's his giant mansion. It's probably full of useful information and things like that. Was scheduled to be demolished the day after he died. Like they don't even give the body.
There's
time
no
to
like
turn
crime
cold.
scene tape. There's no like people doing like forensics or something. Like it's a big
No.
house. You gotta like investigate. What is this?
The body, rigor mortis hasn't even set in. They're like, fuck it, blow it up.
Well, and like
Ridiculous.
like the mystery also makes no sense and is like just not compelling in any way. And I know I brought up Minority Report again, but like that's a movie that has that sort of twisty thriller kind of like, you know, what's going on here, this kind of web of conspiracy kind of thing. And that movie is like incredibly engaging. And I think spoilers for Minority Report, I guess, but like I always forget that like Max von Sydow is the bad guy at the end of that movie, because it, like that movie has so much stuff that carries you along, and you know it's so fascinating. And this movie has like none of that. Like when he's going to James Cromwell's house, I don't know what the fuck he's doing there. It makes no sense.
It's so close to Minority Report to where I watched this today, and it's the first time I've seen it, and I couldn't even tell you how long. To where I'm watching, thinking to myself, "Oh no, Cromwell's the bad guy. Like that's the secret, right? Cromwell's the bad guy. He introduced. No, it's the stupid artificial intelligence thing. Last minute, Will Smith figures it out.
Well, because they cast two guys who are like the best example of like either red herring or actual bad guy, where it's him and also Bruce Greenwood, who's the guy who's like, running the Robotics Institute. I mean, always reliable. Him and Cromwell. I love particularly Cromwell, but like the two of them are like perfectly reliable, especially for this kind of role where it's like, are they the bad guy? Are they not? Kind of deal that can like usually work. But Greenwood is basically there just to be like, hey guys, you can't fuck with like our robot happiness tour.
Yeah, he's a CEO. He's just a normal CEO of trying to protect his company. And they're like, this guy's the evil guy. He's just a dude. He's just a dude.
And versus Cromwell, who most of this movie is spent with like the horrible hologram thing, which is like the most insane, like the most unhelpful fucking tool you could give. The most unhelpful breadcrumb, because he also left Hansel and Gretel the book.
It makes no sense.
Yeah, the worst hologram or Professor No or whatever it was, an AI was more helpful than that fucking thing. Like the thing Rock Williams did the voice. What is this thing? Yeah, well, sorry, you can't answer that. You can't answer it. And then he'll ask a stupid generic question. Oh, so you detective, that is the right question. What the fuck?
And then stops.
Answer him. Just give him an answer.
His responses are limited, Adam, as he says also multiple times.
Oh, that's true. That's true. That's 100%. You're right. I forgot about that. How dare I? But yeah, the whole movie, I'm thinking, like, literally, I'm like, oh, no, he's the bad guy. He did this. He put somehow his brain into the AI or something like that. Or he's setting all this up where he's gone so crazy he prefers machines to humans. Like, anything like that, honestly, would have been more interesting than have it be that stupid blue thing, Vicky, or whatever the fuck it was.
Oh my god, that is so infuriating, because Vicky is something they establish at the very beginning of the movie. Bridget Moynihan talks about like, oh yeah, there's Vicky, who's our artificial intelligence, software system that we use all the time. Hi Vicky, say hi everybody. Hi everybody. And then like an hour and 20 fucking minutes later, it's like, guess what? I did all of this. Fuck you.
Right, exactly. No, you're wrong. You're wrong, dude. In that scene you love so much in the mansion, they show the blue Vicky light where it's also in his mansion. So
right.
Establishing no, it's ridiculous. It's like it's as bad as the Miss Voorhees reveal, if not worse. Where like all of a sudden Miss Voorhees shows up at the end of Friday the 13th, like, well, actually, I'm Jason's mother. She's the killer. Whoa! She's been on screen.
This
for
character
5
we've
minutes.
never seen before in the movie.
Never met her before. You're telling me this one's the killer? She just showed up at a rainy night. It's got a knife on her belt. She's the killer? Get out of here! It's like, but even that's more shocking and surprising than this stupid thing.
That's true. There was the scene at the very beginning of Friday the 13th where like she
down.
was making them soup or something. And it's just like, oh, hello kids, here's some soup. Bye-bye, everybody.
Right.
I'll see you at the end of the movie.
Right. Goodbye. Don't go swimming. But even the scene where Will Smith sits down and starts figuring it out after they find Bruce Greenwood's body. He's like, who else had such ties into the company? Who else could have kept him locked in here and spent the day with robots? About the whole time, like, well, yeah, it's Cromwell. He's going to say it was him. Like, they set it up, even in those lines of dialogue, before he goes, Vicky. Where you're like, oh, what? wait, that's a fucking cop out. It would have made not necessarily been a great reveal or anything that you haven't seen before, but it's such the smarter idea because a they're not beholden to the source material at all, so they could do whatever the fuck they want with the ending. Why not go the easy but more sort of understandable or maybe twisty sort of ending and have it be Cromwell instead of this fucking stupid thing? Because you know why? Because then you couldn't get the big action scene with him having to jump out a giant glowing ball with a fucking needle. That's why.
There's also the factor of, like, none of these action sequences actually progress the story at all, like a good action movie usually does. There's none of that. They kind of just stop
He
and
jumps
he's
off a
dead.
motorcycle, dual wielding pistols, and is an expert shot. So
I mean,
you got that.
I
covered.
kind of enjoy that on a dumb fun level, personally.
Yeah, I was going to go back to something you said earlier when you're like, if the whole, like, you think it's dumb, but if the whole movie would have been like this, like with the freeway scene and stuff, I agree with you. It would have been more enjoyable. Doesn't mean it would have been good,
Not
but at least it'd have been so wacky and over the top. You're like, what the fuck? Like Gods of Egypt. Gods of Egypt is a terrible movie, but I am hard pressed to find anybody who hasn't seen it who at least been like, what the fuck was that?
Yeah.
Like, did at least have a good time with it.
Why is everyone 9 feet tall? Okay, why not?
Like, wait a minute, what? What is happening? Why is Chadwick Boseman talking like that? What the fuck is happening?
Well, and like by the end where it becomes like Robot Revolution, Will Smith is like, it looks like The Matrix where he's like slow-mo, like dual wielding like machine guns in his hands with a leather coat or whatever. I agree with you though. I think the movie would be maybe more enjoyable if it was just all that, right? Just a trashy, fun blockbuster. And I know that this is like, on the studio level, of course, but like, don't put Isaac Asimov's like name on it. Like that is such a
makes no sense.
Ridiculous thing. It's two contrasting things. You cannot make a fun, dumb popcorn like movie for like the lowest common denominator while also being like, but this is about AI and it's serious. These are serious themes and stuff like that. It doesn't make sense.
And also, they established that there will now be one robot to every 5 humans, right? With the new robots.
Right, yeah.
I know I fucking saw Shia LaBeouf and like a dude from New Zealand or whatever beating the shit out of these things with like baseball bats and like a pitchfork. How are they going to overtake us? If you could just pick up a Louisville Slugger and beat the piss out of one of these things, it's like a teenager breaking into your house. Like you just take care of it. We outnumber them, and structurally you can just beat them up or shoot them, and it's over. What the fuck, God! I hate this film.
I hate this film.
Yeah.
Well, and like the way that I think they portray like robots and AI like rising up against humans is so uninteresting to me. Like it's
just
so
action
boring. It's action scenes, and it's just again it's not wrestling with like the implications of what that means for humanity and what it means for the future and just all these kind of big ideas. It's not doing any of that because it wants to be this dumb little action movie.
Yeah, they stop the cars and inflict a curfew, and instantly humanity revolts. Instantly, humans start fighting back. I mean, within minutes. Also, Shia LaBeouf has a legion of like people with them,
right? Especially
all
after
armed to
I
the
love
teeth.
like he's the first one who encounters one of these robots like during this climax, and he's just like, "Hey,
Yeah.
man, what are you talking about? There's no curfew. That's just like human rights." And then like the robot shoves him, and that inspires everybody to be like,
Yep. And
"Oh my
that's
god,
it, man.
torches and pitchforks, everybody! We gotta get them."
Yep, it's like they're like the mob from Hot Rod all of a sudden. Like, like it takes one little thing to spark off this huge revolution. Human beings would shut that revolution down in no time. Like it's nothing. What? And then the big plan was so they could stop the other robots from protecting humankind. We didn't need them. Apparently, Will Smith has got 2 friggin' Glock 9mm taking out hundreds of them by himself.
That scene with like with the AI Vicky, where she's like explaining like her evil plan or whatever, is like maybe the closest that this movie comes to actually like maybe trying to engage with like what it means for humans and robots to live together and stuff like that, and like the whole idea of like humans destroying themselves and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's Ultron.
Yeah, it is basically Ultron.
Basically, yeah.
But again, you're presenting these ideas at the hour and a half mark, where I'm already like, I want to be done with this movie already, and so you can't have me want to think about these things when I'm basically out of the theater already, and it I don't know, it just it doesn't work at all, and like. God, I think I just thought of, like, we talked about the earlier highway scene where like all the robots like attack Will Smith's car with like the two trucks and everything, and again, it should be a huge scene because it's this big action scene, and it's the big scene where we realize like, oh, this isn't just one robot, like all of these robots are revolting basically, but then it's followed by like his like boss yelling at him like, what happened? What robots? There's no robots here. What are you like? Again, it's that thing earlier.
You're off the
just
force.
like,
Get out of here.
right? Yeah, I do. I do like Will Smith yelling at that guy like, "Do you think I care what you think?" And he just like storms off.
And I will also say my favorite bit of dumb action is Shy McBride with the shotgun, just like
that's
using it on robots and
Yeah.
just like the glass breaking. Right. I'm just like, way more of this in the movie. We needed way more of this dumb shit.
That's also where you get a bit of that Alex Proyas, like, he knows how to shoot this and how to make it look like a really interesting kind of, fun way, because the rest of the movie doesn't look like that, and even a lot of the action doesn't, but there's little flourishes in here that do, remind you, like, hey, no, this guy is a really good director.
Another curious example of that is the bit where, like, during the climax when Smith is, like, fighting with a bunch of robots in that weird, dumb, like, catacomb thing, and the camera, like, does a 360 around Smith as he's fighting robots. I'm like,
that's...
way more of this! Why not this? This is so much more fun than what we've been going with.
Well, I guess I was talking about the highway scene. Like, all the cars look so, like, stupid, right? Because, like, it's this kind of, I guess... this thing where we realize, like, well, we're probably not going to have flying cars, like, in the near future, but we are going to have these cars that kind of, like, look like they're hovering, but I don't know, they just look really, like, big and, like, kind of bulbous and not very, like, attractive, except for, like, the Audi, but that's just, like, product placement or whatever.
It's very Cybertruck-esque, quite frankly.
It is kind of Cybertruck, yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Elon thinks this is the way of the future, I'm sure. He wants the world to be like iRobot. He's just like, hey, guys, I'm going to give you Converse, too. It'll be great.
God. I'm going back to the Converse thing, because it isn't just like he's wearing Converse, is that he says that they're vintage from 2004, basically saying to the audience, like, hey, you can go buy these right now after you go see this movie. Ugh, it's...
Oh, that's 100% what it was. Absolutely.
Yeah. Ugh.
That was, I remember because I still even own a pair of Converse All-Stars, but I remember when those came out because it was the classic look, but they were leather instead of canvas. Right. And it was like a huge deal. So they 100% paid for him to, like, totally say, go get them, guys.
Also, by the way, if you're going to have a guy who, like, does a lot of, like, foot chases, worst shoes to possibly wear.
The worst shoes you could possibly fucking wear for that. I wore mine to an hour and a half long concert, and I thought I was going to die. And I was standing in place. I can't believe running. Like, fuck
yeah,
that.
that's why you can't fucking catch those robots, because he's fucking wearing Converse, the worst shoes to run in.
They cut out the 100 times he, like, fucking tripped over those shoes every single chase. They cut those out.
Right, his ankles are probably, like, bleeding.
Yeah, they cut him wrapping ace bandages because of his shin splits.
and also, I do love there's the point when, like, he gets some kind of, like, gunk or blood all over, like, his shoes. That incites the anger in him, where he's like, oh, no. Yeah. You guys fucked with my Converse. I'm gonna get you.
You just wrote a check your robotic asses can't cash. Fucking dumb.
Another thing I kept thinking of while I was watching this movie, and maybe it's because this movie came out last year, but I really thought, like, the better version of this, not the great version of this, but the much better version of this movie is something like The Creator, the movie that came out last year from what's his name?
Gareth Edwards.
Gareth Edwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, that is a movie that is, it's somewhat grounded, right? It's got great visual effects, I think, and it, does realistically want to depict, like, how has our world changed from AI. Like, it has that kind of, like, fun little video at the beginning where it's like them doing like surgery, them doing like just like all the like jobs or whatever, they're like flipping burgers or whatever. And it's like that is such a better version of like depicting the ways that AI has kind of changed like everyday society than this. I mean, granted, that movie goes about like it becomes a whole thing about like 9/11, and it's a whole thing. But I don't know, that movie just, you know, also feels featuring a kind of like someone who is prejudiced towards AI and is a cop, right? Like I don't know, that just feels like a much better version of what this movie's trying to do.
Even with all that movie's various problems, it at least feels more functional than this does.
Right,
To any
yeah.
degree. Yeah, 100%. And even down to, like, that movie has really cool, like, designs for its version of, like, these robots and AI versus... I agree with you guys about, like, I don't like the look of, like, the, you know, like, the Sunny, like, the newer model, the NS9s or whatever the hell they're called. But I really dislike the old models that we see, which are, like, the most generic, like, out-of-the-bin designs that, like, fucking ILM kicked out for the Star Wars prequels. They just look like the worst generic bullshit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like steampunk for dummies. Like, it's just, they're like 100%. They look ridiculous. And by the way, they're called the N5s, just N5 is the new robots. That's about the only thing I actually remember. But yeah, no, that's the thing. The technology in this movie, sort of in all aspects, is just lazy to me. Like, how can we make the cars look like they're from the future? Cover the wheels completely.
Right. Yeah.
Instead of wheels, it's giant balls. Oh, wait a minute. He's still got a motorcycle. It runs on gas. Gas can explode. Like, it's just, hey, normal guns just add shit to the under the barrel because now they're future guns. Like, it's just, none of it serves any real purpose. And you know, like I said earlier, you asked me what I think makes a bad sci-fi. This movie's full of it. It's all this technology and all these things that it don't matter. It's not like they're showing new versions of something that are practical or would work better. Like, even if something as dumb as, like, why did they spend money to make the police tape a hologram between four poles that you could just walk right through?
I thought that was
Who's
kinda
that
fun.
stopping? But who's it stopping?
It's true. Wait, yeah.
Like, if you walk through it and it like alarms or turned red or something like that, I totally get it. It just doesn't do anything. It's just there.
Well,
In theory, I like the idea too, but
right.
there's no point.
Well, and like Adam, you talked earlier about how like you hate when movies do the whole like this is set in the year 2035 when we're gonna have all this technology, and I think part of like what hurts this movie in that regard, I think, is the fact that, you know, we have, you know, some kind of self-driving cars now, and the way that this movie treats like driving manually as if they're like, I don't know, as if it's like a fucking horse carriage or something,
person
right?
Yeah, or you're
makes no
crazy if you're
sense.
driving manually. Yeah,
Yeah,
and also, so everything's electric and controlled by the robots, right? Or by that NSF system or whatever the fuck. Vicky, where is he keeping gas to keep his crotch rocket going? Like, where is he getting the gas?
This is true.
Gas has a shelf life. It's gonna go bad.
Right,
Like,
and the way she says like, does it run on gas, implies that like gas is kind of rare nowadays. It's, you know, it's not
obsolete.
As, like, yeah. Again, it's part of what this movie has. Awful world building. It just doesn't know. It's just not thought out enough, I think, and yeah, it really hurts just a lot of the just basic logic of what we love from like a sci-fi movie, which is this cool tech and how this kind of futuristic technology like shapes the world in different ways. And that's really just it's all missing from this movie.
And I really think it's a cool idea to have an African American actor as a police officer who's prejudiced against robots because of all the real existing prejudices in the world and things like that. It could be a cool idea. It's a simple idea. It's sort of a not, you know, a wholly original idea, but it could work.
Right.
It could be kind of cool. There's a lot you could say there. But as we said earlier, the reasoning behind his prejudice is so fucking thin and weak It makes no sense. It would have made. Why not make the little girl his daughter then?
Right, yeah. He was telling the story about how like Harold Lloyd, not like the movie star, but no relation, had a 12-year-old
Fucking wild
son.
that he specifically underlines like, are you a big Safety Last fan, man? Is that what this?
Right, but like he says like his 12-year-old son was next to him, and I was like, oh, he was the son, and like he was involved in a situation where like a robot didn't save his dad or whatever. Like that makes some sense, but
Yeah. Or like I
no.
said, have him been a family man and the little girl's his daughter. Or his niece or something, and the robot saves him and then she dies. Totally would have added a little more weight to it. Absolutely. Instead of just it's some girl that they were both involved in a traffic collision and went off the road and the robot saved him and not her. So now all robots are bad.
It is also kind of, I just realized it now that he kind of made another version of this similar kind of like thin premise of this with Bright. Like several years ago.
Oh God, are you kidding me? 100%.
Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Jesus.
Somehow a worse movie though. Like, Bright might be one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, there's not as much David Ayer-isms in here.
God.
Yeah, right. Shia LaBeouf didn't have to get a tattoo for this one.
Right, no, and it doesn't take place in South LA like every single David Ayer movie has to.
Yeah, not everybody's in Latino gangs.
No.
So that's good.
But we've gone for a while about iRobot, but I want to talk about the ending bit, the fucking insane button for this movie that has like so many implications. So like after this like big thing where Will Smith like nearly has his robot arm destroyed while he destroys Vicky and all this other bullshit, everything calms down, the dust settles, and the robots are all being taken off to be like decommissioned basically, and Sonny ends up talking with Will Smith and Bridget Moynihan about like, oh yeah, I guess you should tell you all like why what happened with James Cromwell and everything. They reveal that like James Cromwell specifically designed Sonny to murder him, to like catapult this entire thing, so that Will Smith could find the hologram and do all of this. Because that's the whole twist. It's like, oh, I specifically targeted you because you're so well known as the cop who hates robots. So I designed this robot to kill me as the trigger.
But like,
for you to
I hate that I'm about to ask this question, and Thomas, I hope you can give me an answer.
Okay.
Why? Why does he kill him? Why does he have Sonny kill him? I mean, it makes no sense to me.
Because it doesn't make sense. It's ridiculous.
Not at all.
Because apparently he felt he couldn't just tell Will Smith this stuff, so he put all the answers in Sonny's head, and the lawyers and Will Smith would investigate Sonny as if he killed the fucking doctor. Like, what the fuck? So when Vicky's disabled, shouldn't have all the robots sort of just been disabled, not just revert back to, could I help you with anything? Like, you'd think they'd just be done. And then, so the whole idea, like, yeah, and I saw a dream of you standing over all the robot, and it was you, not me. And then it ends with Sonny standing over all these robots. What are the implications of that? Is he going to lead these robots in another revolution? Is he going to teach them to be more human? Is he going to destroy them all or be destroyed with them? Like, I don't understand what they're trying to say, even by that last shot of the movie. Like, what's going to happen here?
Well, because especially like you skipped a bit like in the middle there where like all this is revealed to Will Smith. There's a point where they ask like, well, are you going to arrest me, detective? And he's like, well, I mean, technically murder's listed as like a human killing another human, so you didn't technically break any laws, so guess what? You're free, buddy. Shakes your hands.
Shaka. And then, what am I supposed to do now? I think that's what the professor would want you to figure out.
It's called freedom, buddy. Go out there. Find your way.
Yeah. I think he figured out La Revolution. Like, I think that's what's about to happen. Like,
La Revolution.
Yeah, right, 100%. So maybe David Ayer did write this. Yeah, I don't understand what the ending is trying to say. I don't know if they thought maybe, I mean, let's face it, they probably thought this would be huge and they were going to do a sequel. I mean, without a doubt. That's what they were probably hoping.
Right, yeah.
And I'm glad that didn't happen.
I mean, yeah, especially when it could have conceivably, because this movie, it cost 120, made $353 million.
Power Will Smith.
They probably made about 100 million on it. You got to figure after advertising and all that stuff.
After he paid Converse.
Yeah.
But I think this was definitely one of those where it was like on that weird precipice of like, should we do a sequel because everyone fucking
Right.
hated this? We
Sure,
just made
yeah.
a lot of money somehow because of Will Smith.
Yeah, Will Smith, yeah.
Just like how they were talking about doing I Am Legend, a sequel to that forever.
They are still trying to do that, which is wild. And they
Oh,
specifically
good,
are saying like, we're going with the alternate ending that most people haven't seen, which is wild.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
So-
crazy. This is as recent as like
What?
I think 2023. They said they're gonna do
Yeah.
this. Like Michael B. Jordan, I think, right?
Michael B. Jordan
It's
is
a
involved.
oh,
yeah.
that's right. That's
Yes.
right. I do remember hearing about this now. Look, it's a better ending.
Right.
Still not a good ending. But what?
But also, it's so insane because like so many people have not seen that ending to that fucking movie.
So they like the Descent Part 2. You know, it just reminds me of that they made the Descent Part 2 based on the American version. The ending of the American movie. Not the actual British release or the director's release.
At least that version was widely released in American theaters as opposed to
I
a
guess that's
special
true.
feature on the DVD.
Yeah, right. That you had to wait to see to the DVD and then go through probably ungodly, horribly animated menus to get to it. like I'm sure, like Wolverine driving the motorcycle on the X-Men blue DVD. Like, what the fuck? Like, yeah, that's a terrible idea. But you know what? Though we say that there could very well be a sequel to this in the pipe somewhere too. I mean, how many things are just being rebooted and redone and sequels made with like sort of failing stars or not as bright stars anymore, and it's just a way to keep it going and keep it in the zeitgeist or keep the rights. Hellboy the Crooked Man comes to mind.
Well, I mean, I think the problem is that like Will Smith currently, at least when he's doing that, he's doing it at least with like movies that people had some kind of affection for, like Bad Boys, or even
That's true.
I Am Legend, for like all like the misgivings I do have about that movie. That one is at least more fondly remembered by the general public, as
Yeah.
opposed
Yeah,
to I think
that's true.
iRobot just completely disappeared from the ether to anybody.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know if
guess
anyone
you're
really
right.
even
Yeah.
remembers this fucking movie.
Right.
Like Eddie Murphy's doing it now too. I'd argue one of those was pretty good. One of them was a complete disaster. So yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, I could see this being. Oh God, no, just don't do it. Just don't do it.
I mean, I would never, I would not want to see like a sequel to this at all.
No.
Even if, I mean, I guess I would be okay with it if it got Alex Proyas in the director's chair again, because, I mean, Gods of Egypt was 2016, so it's been like almost a decade since he's made a movie. Again, like a movie like The Creator is kind of a weird spiritual successor to this movie, right? Like it's doing a lot of the
I
same
agree.
themes and all
Yeah.
that stuff, and you know that's a pretty good movie. So yeah, I don't know. I would be really like as dire as I think things are kind of getting in Hollywood a bit. I don't know if they're getting ready to do iRobot 2 or anything.
Well,
What's
especially-
the
this
matter,
is a quote from-
Snowflake? What's the matter, Snowflake? Don't want the Snyder version? I see. Yeah, all right.
I can't
All right,
believe
I
the
thought this was
woke
America.
mob is denying us our iRobot sequel that we all
I thought this was America. I wonder what the Daily Wire has to say about this.
Well, the interesting thing about the Proyas angle of it, this is a quote from him talking about his experience, quote, it was an unpleasant experience. The movie was micromanaged and messed with on every level at every point through the entire production, from pre-production through shoot to post-production. I used to describe working on iRobot as running a marathon with the studio lined up beside you, throwing chairs under you to make everything a little bit harder.
Good God.
So I don't know if he would do
Oh,
iRobot 2
man.
necessarily at this point.
Jeez. So he had a good time.
Great time. Wonderful.
Yeah.
He apparently liked working with Will Smith at the very least. Will Smith apparently was not the problem
Oh, that's nice
on that
actually.
set.
I mean,
That is actually pretty nice.
gosh, and it's very upsetting because like we already made fun of Gods of Egypt earlier, but like again, watching The Crow and Dark City, like I watched The Crow again like a couple nights ago, and that movie looks unbelievable, and like really you can tell like oh like he really had like the juice early on, and I don't know, I kind of would like to see him make something else because he has a very short career, and you know. I mean, they're remaking The Crow, you know, for some
Ugh.
reason. I don't know why,
Ugh.
but I have a lot of feelings about that. But
No.
Yeah,
he's been very vocal about that being remade. But yeah, it's a bummer, especially considering like even with like the Gods of Egypt of it all, or even I rewatched Knowing in prep for this. Knowing is fascinating, just in terms of like there's some great directorial flourishes. Like that whole movie's about like Nicolas Cage finding out like this series of numbers written on an old piece of paper that lead him to like, oh, every single disaster of the last 50 years is on here, and including a few future dates. And there's like some incredibly like upsetting disaster sequences, like a whole bit where like he witnesses a plane crash on a highway and is like in the middle of it, like walking around, just like people are like burning alive and horrible shit like that. And it shows that like Proyas, even like after this movie, I think still had like some interesting directorial flourish, but was just a guy that like could not really work within the Hollywood system at all. The Hollywood system completely crushed him with like this movie. And even like Knowing did decently well, but Gods of Egypt, like as we said, just crumbled apart immediately. It is a real shame. I do wish he would at least be able to do something, but at the same time, I don't know if he can ever go back to like doing a Swall movie again, because it's like, no, I need to be able to do like my big elaborate visuals. I don't know if he can quite go back. He's in a weird kind of box at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, would I like to see him do more stuff? Sure. But I guess I'm kind of on the flip side. I two of his movies I really like. The other four or whatever are pretty fucking bad. Like they're pretty bad. Like Knowing is fascinating, but it's not good. Gods of Egypt is fascinating, but it's terrible. It's just, and this everything. I don't know that he has the juice. I guess he almost reminds me of like a maybe not as bad, but like a Josh Trank situation or Colin Trevorrow situation, where like, yeah, you got one pretty good one, and then maybe you'll get two out of them, and then after that, it's almost like they feel like creatively spent. Or they're guys who can't handle sort of being in the Hollywood system. I think that might be more of it, than anything. Where
especially like the micromanaging angle of it. I think from 2004 to now,
I think that's a big
even more
thing.
of a rampant thing. Yeah, in the last 20 years. So
yeah, I think, and I don't think he can handle that. It just, I think that's kind of obvious from what we've seen.
Well, on that lovely note, why don't we wrap up about iRobot? Adam, our guest, any final thoughts you have about iRobot?
Yeah, movie you love, clearly.
I, hate this. I, think this is garbage. I, never want to watch this again. I, just am perplexed. I think it's a perfect example of a failed summer blockbuster where studios think that all you really got to do, and it unfortunately it does work for the most part, right? Like general movie going audiences are, for the lack of a better term, dumb. It's just bang pow, bright colors, big movie star, sexy people, great movie. And I think this is just a complete sort of cookie cutter formulaic example of that, to where it's like, we'll get good looking people, we'll get popular people, we'll have, at the time, really flashy special effects, and that'll sell the movie. And it did. And unfortunately, that's sort of all there is to it. I don't really see this movie with any sort of merit or redeeming quality. Like, yeah, there's some cool bits here and there, maybe with Will Smith, or some cool ideas, but just watch a better Will Smith movie. Just watch a better sci-fi movie with robots. This is just ultimately forgettable, and it's sort of a blank piece of drywall.
Well, and Bryan, your final thoughts on iRobot?
Yeah, I also really don't like this movie. I think it's kind of a perfect example of an egregious, hard sci-fi movie, in that it again technically counts as a hard sci-fi movie because it's based off of an Isaac Asimov story, and
it was suggested.
Suggested by Isaac Asimov.
How dare you?
Spinning in his grave right now.
How dare you? If I'd have known that's how you were, I wouldn't have come on this.
But yeah, I think I did just think of that I do kind of like about the movie, that I found like a funny gag, is that scene at the bar where they're like him and his boss are like drinking. He like pays for the beers, and it's like $45 for 2 beers or whatever, which I thought was kind of a funny little like visual gag. But
that's the most realistic shit that's going to happen.
I was gonna say, right? Also,
like, that's believable.
That's the future we're living in right now. But yeah, it is. It's exactly. It's a great example, like you said, Adam, of like a bad blockbuster, but also just a bad science fiction movie where it barely has a grasp on any of these themes, and it doesn't want to engage with any of them because it's more interested in just, like you said, like, you know, for the time, like CGI, great CGI, and a huge movie star that, like, even as much as I don't like this movie, I kind of like Will Smith, even though I think he's miscast, and, you know, all the things that we've said. Like, he will deliver a line like the one about the cat, and I'm just like, God damn it, Will Smith! Like, you got me. Like, he's just so charming. But yeah, the visual effects are terrible. There is no sense of world building in this thing, and you get no sense of like Alex Proyas as a director from, you know, what he's done previously, and all of his style just feels like it's been dampened by the studio, which is really sad. But yeah, it's weird. I don't know. It is this kind of forgotten movie, but it was such a big deal, and it made so much money because of Will Smith, and yet, yeah, no one really thinks about it, and it's a great example of just Hollywood taking these really, like, deep and, you know, interesting philosophical and moral quandaries and watering them down for just, like, generic audiences, and it's just, like, so upsetting. Bad movie. Bad robot.
A real bad robot. Fuck you, J.J. Abrams. This is the bad robot. That little red thing. Yeah, I would still say I really don't like this movie either. I think this is definitely a great example of like a dawn of the new millennium blockbuster that has been completely like mishmashed and rehashed of like various different drafts. It feels truly like an actual Frankenstein together script on every level. I think there are certain points where Proyas' kind of like fun directorial flourishes get to like come out a bit, but it is mostly very like bland stylistically. And I think Will Smith is like saddled with some of like his worst attempts at jokes. Down to, we didn't mention this, but there's a recurring bit about his ex-wife, like the most cliche thing you could do, particularly for like a like, I'm a bitter cop. Oh, my ex, you remind me of my ex-wife, everybody, my ex-wife. Am I right? Can you believe it? I used to be married to that lady, and she's busting my balls. That's so much of his fucking jokes in this movie. But at the same time, I would say that I don't think it's like necessarily the worst of Will Smith, even of this era. Like, I would say the bottom of the barrel for Smith around this era is more like Wild Wild West, or particularly Men in Black 2. Men in Black 2 is one of the biggest wastes of fucking time I've ever seen in a fucking movie. Truly. And it probably not helped by it being attached to like source material that's far better with its predecessor. But at the same time, yeah, iRobot, it's very forgettable, has very lazy world building. Like, we didn't even mention this either, like the whole Lake Michigan thing, where it's like all the robots are ported to the dried up Lake Michigan, where there's like a bunch of fucking crates. Like, that's the most creative they can get with like dystopian future.
Yeah. Ugh.
It's pretty underwhelming on every level. But I think, like Ryan mentioned, a really good example of something attempting to kind of have some of these hard sci-fi ideas, but not willing to like really explore them. But at the same time, also not willing to be as dumb as like a fun action movie with sci-fi elements that like it could have been. It tries to kind of have its cake and eat it too with both of those, and succeeds at being really neither necessarily. But it does succeed at being a great Converse commercial, because I immediately bought Converse right after I saw this movie, as everyone did. Truly. And I pulled up in my Audi that I bought right before as well.
And you had your Converse delivered by FedEx.
Right, of course, yes. I had along with the CD player that I totally bought, because that's still very relevant to have.
Enjoy your back spasms with the Converse.
Great, we'll love it. But let's move on to our usual segment, Between the Lines. So for every episode of Cinema to the Letter, Brian, myself, and our guest, if they so please, will go ahead and talk about another movie that is either related to the movie we're talking about today to some degree, or could be an alternate choice for what we're talking about in terms of like the topic of like E for egregious, hard sci-fi, for example. And I'm going first here. And I'm more recommending something that I would advise you watch instead of iRobot. It's a movie we kind of referenced earlier, from around the same time, from a director of a movie we talked about as well, Minority Report. But I'm specifically going to mention Steven Spielberg's 2001 film AI Artificial Intelligence. No, this isn't an AI generated film that you put a prompt in of like Spielberg robot movie. That's not what this is. This is the 2001 film starring Haley Joel Osment as young David, a little robot boy who is bought by a couple who has a son that is in a coma, and they want to kind of have, some kind of kid to take care of in the form of this little robot boy that's being sold out to the markets. When their son ends up getting out of his coma, after, David has become so attached to the two parents, things get kind of, awkward with them, where they want to kind of distance themselves from the robot. So they literally abandon this young robot, and the movie proceeds to be a sort of Pinocchio-esque journey of this little robot boy trying to find his family, trying to find some kind of connection with humanity in a world that doesn't want him to have that. And I'm recommending it mainly because of sort of the AI connection that we're talking about. With, like, there's a lot of robot characters in this movie, but also because I think this is a movie that fits so much better as like a hard sci-fi film. I remember it came out in 2001 in the middle of the summer because it was a Steven Spielberg movie. So everyone was like, oh, it's going to be a big summer blockbuster hit. Everyone's going to love it. Everyone's going to see it. And this is an incredibly upsetting, dark sci-fi movie about the nature of being like a robotic being who is kind of close to having human feelings and connections, and realizing that the world does not care for him, that humanity does not want to be like near him to any degree. I think it's a brilliant Spielberg movie of this particular era, kind of a fulcrum point into his darker period in the start of the new millennium. It still has a lot of his like bigger sci-fi kind of blockbuster grandiose ideas in it, but also just the visual flair of it and the world building of it. I think it has a lot of great performances from like Haley Joel Osment. I think this is such a great example of like how a human can play a robot, from him, but also from Jude Law, who I think is amazing as well, and just, I think, an incredibly underrated Spielberg movie. I think one of his really underrated masterpieces of this particular era that is also, like I said, from the guy who, when I saw this as a child, I knew as like, oh, the Jurassic Park guy, and, E.T., all these other, like, these big, famous movies that, like, are, like, big crowd pleasers. I can't wait to see it. And my mind was completely smashed into atoms by just how dark and upsetting this movie is. But I rediscovered it, a couple of years ago, and I think it's held up incredibly well. And like I said, just like one of the great underrated Spielberg movies, and I think a much better example of dealing with a lot of these questions that iRobot kind of shrugs at answers to. But I know, Brian, you're a big fan of this one, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think Spielberg in the 2000s is maybe where he's at his peak, in my opinion. I love all the stuff he's doing around that time, and yeah, I think when I watched AI for the first time, I think I knew that it was like a bit more, emotional and less like, that fun kind of Spielberg we get from like Jurassic Park and stuff like that. But I was not ready for how deeply weird and deeply upsetting the movie is. Like, it gets very strange, especially towards the end, of course, but it also just becomes so emotional and sad and upsetting in a way I love. I think it's an incredible movie. It does get better and better every time I watch it. It also is like you said, a better example of what we're talking about here. Of it's still kind of a crowd pleaser, I guess, because it's Spielberg and he knows how to like tell a story in a really interesting way, but he really wants to engage with a lot of those ideas, and it's really fascinating. I really adore that movie. Haley Joel Osment is incredible, I think, just absolutely incredible in that movie. Yeah, one of Spielberg's best. I absolutely adore it.
Well, and Adam, you brought up one of the hologram character and stuff, and we talked about this on an older Double-Edged Double Bill episode. You still a fan of this one?
Oh yeah, dude, 100%. I loved this movie since it came out. You know, it was one of those where I remember championing it way back when, and people that I was associated with, their friends or whatever, being like, "What? Are you fucking serious?" Like, yeah, it's really good, man. And, you know, and also it would have fit to the pick too, as sort of the Frankenstein sort of script or whatever you want to call it of the production.
Mm,
Obviously, the whole Kubrick aspect of it too, and
right.
you know, I think that's where you might get a lot of the darker sort of tones to it. Not to say Spielberg isn't capable; he 100% is, but I definitely feel like Kubrick's really in there too.
Yeah, Adam's referring to that this was originally pitched as a Stanley Kubrick project, and he didn't end up getting to it before he passed away. So Spielberg took the reins of
Right.
it. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a phenomenal movie. It's my favorite Jude Law. I think in anything, I've always loved Gigolo Joe. I think it's his absolute best performance. And yeah, Haley Joel Osment. I mean, it's just, you know, I get he won the Oscar for Sixth Sense, but he should have been absolutely nominated for this too if he wasn't. I
He
mean,
did
it is an
not win for Sixth Sense,
absolute.
but he was nominated for Sixth
Or he was
Sense.
nominated. He was nominated.
Yes.
Whatever. Fuck off. But
Actually, excuse.
he should have been nominated for this as well. It's just an absolute powerhouse of performance, and plus the Ministry concert scene at the Flesh Pit where it's fucking Gleason is the sort of guy running it, and it's just what a
Yes.
fucking crazy chaotic scene. And then like the different robots in the scene, like the older models where it's got like the video screen and all, like it's just fucking what a great movie. There's always something to look at. There's always something just great in this movie. Good, great pick, solid pick.
Well, Brian, what is your pick for Between the Lines?
Yeah, I'm going with a bad movie here. I'm going with the Total Recall remake from 2012, directed by Len Wiseman. I had not seen this movie before this week, and I had watched the original, the Paul Verhoeven movie, like a few months ago, and I thought, hey, I should watch the remake. I know it's bad, but why not? Let's watch it. And I never watched it, but I watched it this week, and this shit stinks. It is so bad. If you don't know, it's based off of Philip K. Dick's story, also the Paul Verhoeven film. And it is about a blue collar worker played by Colin Farrell who goes to this facility called Recall to get the chance to pretend he's a secret agent, a spy, and get these memories implanted in his head. But he essentially goes on this chase, this thrill ride, and the way that we were talking about with iRobot, all of the of its time CGI, right? Like very 2004 CGI that has aged really badly. I think this movie has a lot of elements of 2012 blockbusters that I just really despise. For one, the movie is baked in like just so much lens flare, right? Like this is kind of the post like J.J. Abrams, like lens flare is kind of like cool and we need to like fill it, you know, put it in every movie and stuff like that. But we also just talked a lot about with iRobot the distillation of all of these kind of important themes. And I think the Total Recall remake is the exact same thing, where it removes all of the ambiguity and the kind of weird fantasy element of the movie, right? Of is he dreaming? Is this real? Is he actually a secret agent, or is he imagining this? Is he still at Recall? All that stuff. None of that is really handled well in this movie, and you know, it is just a generic, boring, just like iRobot, also a Minority Report ripoff set in a like boring, lifeless city that is like steel and glass and just kind of like brutalist architecture, but it's got all this just boring lore about like the fall and like the this weird city that's like, you know, you take a tube in the middle of the earth, like it's so boring and so lifeless. And I love Colin Farrell. He is one of my favorite actors working today, but he's really kind of asleep in this movie. It just doesn't work at all. And he has no chemistry with Jessica Biel or Kate Beckinsale, who are in this movie. Bryan Cranston's the villain. Ugh, it's just really, really bad and just takes every element from the Verhoeven movie, which it's like, it's doing these little winks, right? These referential winks to the Verhoeven movie, which makes it so much more insulting, in my opinion, because it just reminds me that I could be watching that absolute masterpiece instead of this movie. Yeah, I'm assuming both of you guys have seen this movie, but yeah, how do you guys feel about Total Recall, the remake?
We actually covered this on one of the later episodes of Double Edged.
Oh, okay.
I don't really have strong feelings on it, if nothing else, because I watched it like a little over a year ago, and I think I've completely forgotten everything about it on like every conceivable level. It feels kind of like, in one ear out the other, kind of like blockbuster filmmaking, which I'm not disagreeing necessarily. I think it's bad, but at the same time, it doesn't really stick with me to any degree. It just is like one of the more forgettable examples of like a remake of like a great movie that didn't really need to happen. It didn't offend me enough to like really stick with me and all. It kind of in a similar way to like speaking of Verhoeven, like the RoboCop remake,
right? Yeah,
from like 2014, around that same time, where I'm just like, those two movies do exist, but I don't have much thing to say about either of them, really good or bad.
I remember kind of actually liking this when it first came out, and then rewatching it for even our show. For that, I remember thinking, like, if this wasn't called Total Recall, I feel like it'd be a little bit more positive on it than I am.
Sure.
Like you said, if they wouldn't have done the sort of callbacks to the Verhoeven movie, I think it would have worked a little bit more. But like they automatically tie it to a better version of what the story they're trying to tell, and it just really sort of ruins the whole thing. And yeah, I agree. I get totally why you picked this for iRobot to pair with it, or whatever you want to call it, because it is 100% sort of the same thing we're talking about. It's just a flashy blockbuster filled with sort of soulless special effects, and yeah, it's a by the numbers sort of generic action sci-fi.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, what is your pick for Between the Lines?
All right, so my pick, when I picked it, I didn't realize how much it actually was going to tie into sort of what we were talking about. It is a science fiction movie based on a Philip K. Dick story, who also did Total Recall and Blade Runner and all these things. And it's about sort of paranoia to deal with a potential android. It's called Imposter. It's starring Gary Sinise, Madeline Stowe, Vincent D'Onofrio, Elizabeth Pena, Tony Shalhoub, Mekhi Phifer. It just kind of this really cool cast. It's in the future, and this sort of brilliant weapons designer is accused of being replaced at some point by an android that has a bomb in its chest, because that is the way that invading alien races attack us. They sort of tend to send down android suicide bombers that sort of fit in to certain companies and things like that, so they can infiltrate and then explode the place or assassinate a target or whatever. And he's accused of being switched out and becoming one of those. And so sort of the whole movie is him running and trying to figure out, how to prove he's not this robot. And then Vincent D'Onofrio's character is trying to capture him to prove he is a robot. And it's a really sort of cool mystery that goes all the way up until literally the last frame of the film. And then you sort of get your final answer of is he or isn't he. I picked it because I think it's a flawed movie. I think it's a decent movie. It's just definitely one that nobody's really seen or heard about. But I think it deals a lot better with sort of the topics we were sort of visiting in iRobot and group paranoia around artificial intelligence and what they could mean and what it could do to sort of the world and humanity and things like that. I think it clocks in at like an hour and a half. It's a breeze to get through. It's cool performances. It's flawed as fuck, but it's fun. It's better than definitely iRobot. It's just it's one of those that I feel like if they were going to redo it, this would be a cool one to sort of redo. But yeah, it's one of those, like, it come out early 2000s, I think 2001 or 2002. There was a little crop of weird sci-fi movies from that era that I really like this, The Jacket, things like that from around then that I just kind of always stuck with me. But yeah, so Imposter.
Yeah, this is one when I asked you about, like, usually behind the curtain, everybody, when we have guests come on the show, I usually try and tell them, like, oh yeah, Bryan and I picked, like, these two different movies so we could, like, make sure that there's no overlap. And Adam, like, kind of threw a couple choices, but ultimately went with this. And this was definitely a movie that I was completely unaware of to any degree until Adam referred it to me. And it is interesting because it's also like Gary Sinise as a star is really weird because this is not too long before he just stops being in movies. It came out not just in 2002, Adam, but January 4th, 2002. So this was like pure dumping ground, like first weekend of 2002 movie.
Yeah,
So
January 4th is my brother's birthday. Can confirm it's a dumping ground.
but yeah, I'm curious if nothing else because it's just a movie that I had no real idea about. But an interesting cast. Nothing else. David Chloe is on this was one of the writers of the Riddick movies and stuff. So it's a interesting thing I just was not aware of. I'm curious to see it. Bryan, I'm guessing you have not seen this either.
No, and I hadn't heard about it until you kind of let me know about this, and I mean, hearing you describe it, Adam, like sounds kind of fascinating actually, and just knowing that it's based off a Philip K. Dick story, and I'm looking through like the credits and it's shot by Robert Elswit, which sounds awesome because he's an incredible cinematographer. And yeah, I don't know. It seems very cool though. I'm definitely going to see this at some point because any of these kind of sci-fi movies, especially based on off a Philip K. Dick story, I'm really fascinated by.
By the way, very important to note that it's spelled Impostor, not E.
Right? Yeah, I couldn't find it earlier.
When I first was googling this, I was like, "Wait, what? Imposter? Like the documentary from 2012? Is that what I was talking about?" Like, no.
That's a good documentary.
It's a very good documentary, but not this movie that you recommended.
No.
Yeah, the SEO on this is a bit odd. Let's go ahead and repeat our titles like we'd like to do. So people, if you want to add these to your watch lists and whatnot, you can. I recommended the 2001 Steven Spielberg film AI Artificial Intelligence.
And I had the 2012 remake of Total Recall by Len Wiseman.
And I had the 2002 film Imposter by Gary Felder.
And we're going to be wrapping up here, but we want to thank some people. We want to thank Burial Grid for our music used on the show. Purchase this music at burialgrid.com. Thanks to Michelle Kyle for our artwork. Find her at MishKyle96 over on Twitter. And thanks to our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/cinema2letter, where for just $1 a month, y'all get to listen to bonus stuff. Like during this month, we'll be putting out a couple things, like our audio reviews, where I think, Bryan, we can definitely confirm we want to do one for Trap, and I think one maybe for Alien Romulus as well in August as we're winding down on the summer. Those are both big ones we're going to talk about.
Oh yeah, Trap. Very, very excited for that movie. That'll be fun.
For sure. And we'll also be doing our audio commentary for The Iron Giant, which is going to be our big kind of like bonus thing for that particular month. Celebrating its 25th anniversary during that month. We wanted to, celebrate 1999, the biggest movie year's 25th anniversary to some degree. So why not talk about one of the great movies from there? And also, we should note, in the past, patrons have been able to pick individual movies we cover for a season. Usually we give them like the opportunity to pick like, hey, what's our A for Atypical choice going to be? Or our this season our I for Indie and stuff like that. But we decided for next season, the patrons aren't just going to pick, one particular movie. They are going to end up picking our entire topic for next season. That's right, everybody. You cineast patrons, as we like to call you out there, are going to get the chance to pick what our overall topic will be for next season, which, if you look at your calendars, that'll end up being the October spooky season. And the poll is going to go up the day after this episode comes out. So on August 7th, you all get to have the chance to vote for our topic for our spooky horror season, which Bryan and I ended up finalizing between ghosts or zombies. So you guys get to pick if we cover 6 movies that fit, C for classic, I for indie, N for new, E for egregious, M for masterpiece, A for atypical, all centered around either ghosts or zombies, which we kind of racked our brains about, Bryan, in terms of what we wanted to do. And those both feel kind of like wide enough to where we could do a lot of different interesting choices for each of our different episodes for next season, right?
Yeah, but it's still kind of broad enough to where we can, cover a lot of different movies, and that's kind of vague enough to have a lot of choices, but specific enough to where we can, we're not just doing like what we did last year, which is just like horror in general. We're getting a little bit more specific, which will be fun, and I'm curious to do either of those because great choices for either of those movies. So yeah, it'll be fun.
And Adam, I know you're a big horror person. Where would your heart go between those two? Which would you rather see us devote a season to, ghosts or zombies?
I think you're going to get better material out of ghosts, but I think there's more material in zombies. If that makes sense. There's way more zombie movies you could choose from than I would say, really ghost movies, but I think there's better ghost movies.
Sure, yeah.
So you're saying that there will be more opportunity for Egregious for zombies necessarily. There's a
Yeah,
glut
yeah,
of those. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Right.
think so. I think so. And also, with ghost movies, you're going to run into a lot of the Japanese remakes and things like that are sort of the more popular ones. But I don't know. I mean, either one, I think you're going to have a good time. I just think Ghosts is less oft talked about than sort of zombie films in general. So I think Ghosts would be more interesting. Or Albert Brooks comedies. The Scout with Brendan Fraser. I want you guys to do a whole movie, a whole episode.
For sure. We'll do Finding Dory, not Finding Nemo, Finding Dory specifically.
No. Finding Dory specifically.
Right.
For
yes.
sure.
Like I said, over there at patreon.com/cinema2letter, if you sign up for the $1, you get to help vote in that. It'll be up, like I said, on August 7th, and it'll run through at least the weekend. You'll have about a few days to vote on that. But yeah, whichever one wins, ghosts or zombies, that'll end up being our topic for our next season. But on that note, it's time we thank one more person here. We got to thank Adam. Thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Yes, thank you.
Always fun to have you on.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me back. I really appreciate coming back. Always a good time. And as far as like anything to plug, no, nothing. So yeah, I don't really fuck around on social media that much.
No, it's true. Adam's the true free robot in this case. He's like Sonny at the end. He's just like off in Lake Michigan. He just ran to Lake Michigan and just didn't look back.
So my nickname is Alan Two Dicks. It's really weird.
Well, I'll just plug that you can listen to the entire back catalog of Double Edge Double Bill with Adam on our Podbean main feed if you want to do that. If you liked this enough, you can listen. We still get a fair amount of downloads for some of the old material, Adam. But yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff in the backlog. Always fun talking with you, Adam. Always love having you on. We'll definitely have you back on for sure at some point if we can force you to do so.
Oh, yeah. Well, hey, man. Spooky season. Keep me in mind.
Perhaps. But on that note, we should just wrap up here. We want to tell you all that you can find us on whatever social medias that you might peruse, whatever hell site. We're at cinema2letter over there. And you can find me on mostly Letterboxd as at Not the Who's Tommy, though I do also do some writing at film-cred.com.
And you can follow me on Twitter, where I'm trying to get away from it, but I'm still sometimes going back to it, at BRYANDRADE and the number 3. Or you can follow me on Letterboxd, where I am very active on there. But yeah, you can follow me there at my name. So yeah, follow me on either of those.
And for more of us in audio format, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcasting platform you listen to. If you're listening on Talk Film Society, our podcast network, why not listen to all the other great shows that are on the network along with ours? And you can also dig into the archives, like I mentioned, on our Podbean main feed for all the old Double Edge Double Bill stuff or the first 5 seasons of this show. All sorts of stuff you can listen to over there. And if you can't, support us on the Patreon, that's cool. Money can be tight. The free way to help us out is to rate, review, or simply share the show around to give us more visibility. And you can, make sure that everybody follows the 3 laws of podcasting, which are constantly broken by us and several other, probably far more successful people who do podcasting to any degree. But I'll just tease now as we head out of here. Our next episode, next week, we'll be doing our M for Masterpiece pick, which for Hard Sci-Fi, which we ended up deciding on Deja Vu, the Tony Scott film from 2006, which I've never seen. It's a blind spot for me with the Tony Scott filmography, Denzel Washington, all that, have not seen it. Adam, are you a fan of this one?
I mean, yeah, dude. I pretty much Denzel, anything in Tony Scott, I'm in. Yeah, I think Deja Vu is a very, very cool movie. It's about as far as I would go with it, but I do think it's a cool movie.
Well, and Bryan, I know you've seen this one. You were very much like a catalyst for picking this particular one. So do you think it's a bit more than just a cool movie?
I mean, yeah, I quite love it. And I mean, I've only seen it once. I watched it like a year or 2 ago, I think. And I really fell in love with it. I love Tony Scott, love Denzel Washington, and it's such a very interesting movie and a very interesting kind of sci-fi movie for us to pick for this, because it is a lot more fun, and it is more of a blockbuster, but more of a good blockbuster, unlike iRobot. But yeah, should be very fun, and I'll be very curious to see kind of what you think about it, because yeah, and just talk about Tony Scott and stuff like that. It'll be a good time.
Well, that's for next time. Until then, everybody, you gotta lace up your Converse and start running. And you'll get so far. You get so far away from those robots that are trying to steal purses.